Yeah.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Robert Dold, who was just nominated to be the 10th Congressional District Republican nominee. He was elected to that on the February 2nd election. We should say we're taping this show on February 7th. You folks will be seeing it at different times. If you watch on YouTube, you may be seeing it within a few days. If you're watching in the 10th Congressional District, most likely in about a week, in the week of the 14th, and in Rockford and Aurora and the city of Chicago a little bit later. But this is going to be a major, if you're not in the 10th, you want to keep watching this. But this is going to be a major race. There are a lot of eyes going to be on the 10th Congressional District from around the country. The Democrats say this is their second best opportunity across the country to pick up a seat. The Republicans have held the 10th Congressional seat for the last 30 years. But it's a Democratic seat. Barack Obama, I think, won it. Well, it's a bit unusual in 2008, I think, with 61% of the vote, right?
He did, that's right.
And before that, John Kerry won it in 2004 with 53% of the vote. Yet the Republicans have held it for 30 years. And they're not giving up now. Robert Dold, however we want to say it. Sure. He is the nominee, and he's going to be I think most would agree. I think Democrats would say that. It's going to be a tough race. He's going to be a formidable opponent for their nominee. The Democrats' nominee is of course Dan Seals. He ran twice before in 2006 and in 2008, very close races against then incumbent Congressman Mark Kirk. Did very well, within 2 or 3 points of winning that race against a formidable opponent himself, Mark Kirk. So keep watching. We're going to be covering a lot of issues, domestic policy, foreign policy, cultural issues. And just a brief word about our guest who grew up in Winnetka, went to the Sears School in Kenilworth. He was right on the border for the first 8 years. That's a public school. Then New Trier High School, then Denison University, then Indiana University Law School, MBA from Northwestern University, then into the family business. Was it pest control?
Rose Pest Solutions.
Rose, I don't know how I can forget that. Rose Pest Solutions. And he is the president. His father is the chairman. He would like to be, if you're living in the 10th Congressional District, your congressman from the district, replacing Mark Kirk, who is running for the U.S. Senate. Bob, I'm going to go back and forth in the show between Bob and Robert.
Sure.
Look, there's all this stuff going on about national security. It's all about the interrogation of the Christmas Day bomber. The Republicans have been saying it's been botched. The Democrats and the Obama administration say, no, it's working quite well. They're working within the Constitution, and they're getting information. Who's right?
Well, I think, first of all, let me say thank you so much for having me on the show. I would say that with regard to what's going on with Mirandizing the Christmas Day bomber, I would say that this is a different type of a time, and that should be treated as an enemy combatant. And I think that we have to recognize we're at war. So I'm delighted that there are those that think they're making progress, because that's what we need to do for the safety of our country. But I think they should be treated a little bit differently than a United States citizen.
So the story was that Abdul Muttalib, I think that would be the gentleman's name, when he was apprehended and brought in, he was interrogated, we're told, for about 50 minutes, right. At which point he was Mirandized and he started lawyering up.
Right.
At which point the Republicans started complaining when they got wind of that and said they should have been interrogating, getting information, putting aside where he should be tried. And now it turns a month later, the Obama administration tells some legislators that keep it quiet, but we're getting information. It's coming to us. We don't want it to get out. A day later, Robert Gibbs, the White House press secretary, tells the public and the world we're getting information. The Republicans cry foul and say, what's going on here? You told us to keep quiet, and then you tell the world, and isn't this a national security issue? Do you really want the terrorists outside to know that this guy's talking? Do the Republicans have a gripe, or are they both playing politics? Democrats are saying, the Obama administration is saying, first you complained that we weren't getting information, now you complain that we are getting it, but we're telling people. And so are both sides, Republicans and Democrats, kind of playing politics with national security?
Well, I think there is. I think there's some political posturing that's going on, and I think one of the reasons that I think that the White House came out and with a statement was the fact that there was some leaking going on from Capitol Hill. I think the important thing for the American public is that we are getting information. We're getting information from Abdul Muttalib, and I think that's what's important for the American public, no question.
Well, was it appropriate to Mirandize? Is that really necessary? If you have a terrorist like that, certainly you can probably say stronger than a terrorist when you got 40 people who witnessed this thing on the airplane. So should we be Mirandizing him, or should we have just brought him in, interrogated him, let the CIA do it, not necessarily torture, not waterboard, but intense interrogation of this guy to get as much information as to things that might be coming up in the next month?
Well, I think that's
and
critical.
We didn't do that, right?
Yeah, no, we didn't.
It's indisputable we didn't do that. Was that a mistake? If you were there in Congress, you have some experience. You have been in Congress as a investigative counsel working on the government reform and oversight committee, so you know something about how that works.
Right.
If you were there not as a investigative counsel, but as a congressman from the 10th Congressional District, would you, Robert Dold, be standing up and speaking out and saying, look, we're doing this all wrong?
Well, I think that we're not doing it all wrong, okay, because I think there are some very talented people in Washington that do have our best interests at heart. I think that we do need to treat this terrorist as an enemy combatant, because we are at war with terror, and should not be Mirandized like an average everyday citizen. The complaint that we're hearing from the other side is this is exactly how we treated the shoe bomber. And I think that the difference may be, and the little nuance is, this is somebody that we know was in Yemen, whose father came to the embassy and said to us, hey, I'm concerned about my son, who's got some extremist tendencies. And so we can tie that very quickly to Al-Qaeda, to the war on terror, and I think that's going to be the nuanced difference.
So, well, also, we know a lot more. I don't know exactly when the shoe bomber was. That was quite a while ago.
Sure.
We should have a learning curve here that goes from administration to another. The Obama administration shouldn't sort of roll the clock back to 2005 and say that's where we are.
Right.
So they should know more. It seems like they were caught unprepared. They have this committee set up internally that was supposed to figure out who does what. The committee was not operative. And so who really decided this? It sounds like Eric Holder, the Attorney General on his own, decided he would be Mirandized, he would be treated as a civilian, that is, he would be eventually tried in a federal court as opposed to a military tribunal. It does seem like, even though we're 1 year into the Obama administration, these guys aren't quite ready to, for prime time.
Well, I think the difference, and one of the things that we need to focus on is we need to be using our tax dollars and our resources to defeat terrorism as opposed to defending the terrorists when they come over and we actually apprehend them. So I think that's going to be something that the American people, I think, are in favor of. I certainly understand some of the nuances that they're talking about in Washington, but at the end of the day, what we need to get the information from this guy so that it can help prevent future terrorist attacks. And that's critical.
Does that mean that you, if you were in Congress, would say don't Mirandize him, certainly don't do it after 50 minutes of interrogation?
I would think that would be fair.
Would you also say this guy should be tried in a military tribunal as an enemy combatant, not in the federal courts, certainly not in New York City?
Absolutely.
You agree with all that?
I do.
Okay. Has the front in the war on terrorism, has it gone from Iraq to Afghanistan, and now is it going as well to Yemen and Somalia? So it's being broader,
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I do agree. I think it is being broader, and I think there are those that certainly are looking at Yemen being the next front for the war on terror. And I think we need to, in terms of our intelligence, we need to make sure we're beefing up our intelligence so that we have a better idea of what's going on there so that we can better protect the American citizens.
So you and your opponent agree on that, because Dan Seals has said we need stronger intelligence networks.
Without
Agreement,
question.
right? Common
Absolutely.
ground between the two of you, Democrat
Absolutely,
and Republican.
without question.
All right. And on the other hand, he says, and we should say, folks, we did not have Dan Seals on the show during the primary, but to be fair, we didn't have Robert Dold on. But we now have Robert Dold on. He came to us. I mean, I ran into the story as I ran into Bob, and he said, want me on the show, I'll be there. And we appreciate that. On the other hand, I called the Seals campaign on Friday afternoon to speak with the campaign manager, Pep Moggy, and they said they'd get right back to me. I explained we were having Robert Dold here on the show, I knew we wouldn't set something up for the two of them for Friday or Sunday 2 days later. But I did want to say, what can I tell you folks who might be Democrats or independents or just in general Dan Seals supporters or Republicans who want to see him? What can I say? When will he be here? Will he be here? They never got back to me. So look, we're fair and balanced. We'd like to see Dan Seals on the show. We'd like to see him on frequently. We'd like to see Robert Dold on the show frequently. We've got 9 months. This could be a very interesting campaign. And whether you're in the 10th or outside the 10th, I think you want to hear a lot from Seals and Dold. And so that invitation is extended now publicly. We hope he will join us. And until that happens, you'll see during the show, I think I know something about Dan Seals, just like I know something about Bob Dold. So I'll be putting forth what I think his views are, and we'll be doing an issue contrast. And, in a month or two or less, if Robert Dold wants to come back and give us a 10th Congressional District report, he's going to do it. And if Seals wants to let it just be a one-way conversation without him participating, we'll do that. But our preference is to have Dan Seals here in the flesh and have him telling us his views rather than me trying to speculate. But that having been said, I did hear Dan Seals during the campaign say that he differed with Barack Obama. He didn't think 30,000 additional troops would make a difference in Afghanistan. He said with the troops we have in there now, with the troops that are Afghanistan, I don't know if they're United Nations troops there, or NATO troops, I guess would be more accurate. I think he said there's something like 200,000 troops there, so 30,000. And he said the Karzai government's corrupt. This is not the way to go. As he said, need more intelligence, need to look at other areas, but don't put in any more troops to Afghanistan. You disagree? You supported 30,000 more. Would you have supported more because the generals there, McChrystal, wanted 40,000?
Exactly. I would have given 40,000. I would have supported going to 40,000. I do also agree with Dan Seals that I think the government over there is corrupt, but I certainly would have given the additional troops needed. I think that's what General McChrystal asked for, and if we are going to provide the necessary backup and support for the men and women in harm's way right now, we have to give them what the general on the ground is asking for in order to do the job we've asked them to do.
Well, can the United States accomplish its objectives in Afghanistan if the government is corrupt there?
Well, I think we have to start marching down that path as opposed to leaving it wholeheartedly. I think we need to have benchmarks for success as opposed to timelines for withdrawal. I think that's important. But I think we need to be working with that government to try to make sure that we are making strides towards our objectives.
What do we do about Yemen? Is that going to be a major trouble spot coming up?
Well, I think it
already is.
It is a trouble spot. There's no question about it.
So what do we do?
Well, I think we have to, again, beef up intelligence until we figure out what's the best thing to do. It's clear that we cannot spread ourselves so thin across the globe, but I think it is something that we need to be aware of. It needs to be on our radar screen, and we need to be monitoring it on a constant basis.
We're going to go back and forth here on the show between domestic policy and foreign policy. Let's take a quick detour to domestic policy.
Sure.
You and Dan Seals, I believe, both you agree that the $700 billion financial sector bailout was a good idea and that both of you would have supported. That's my understanding for Seals, my understanding for you, right?
Well, that is true, and there's a little bit of a nuance there, and I think that there's no question that when we're talking about any sort of a bailout, that we need to have a threshold that is extraordinarily high. I think that's critical because what you're doing is you're encouraging excess risk-taking, and that's not what we want. But I would have supported it because we were on the brink of financial Armageddon, and I think that was largely shored up by about March. So I would have absolutely voted for it, but I don't agree with how it's being handled now in terms of a slush fund. If we look at the banks themselves—
By a slush fund, you mean?
Meaning that they've got these funds that have been paid back and they're going to look to use it in any way they see fit.
Not necessarily for the financial sector, for just something they think is good, useful.
The thing is that some—
Political policy,
Sure.
whatever.
We're looking at 70% of those dollars that they paid out to the banks have been paid back with interest, some at 11%. We're looking at the remaining 30% to be paid back on a schedule that's set by law. And it just read in the paper the other day that actually for the financial sector, the United States government's made over $16 billion on it. So, I mean, the question is what do we do from here? And it started to spread away from the financial sector when it was financial Armageddon. I do believe, as I believe Seals might have said as well, that we would have supported it. And I think that it's reached its objective, and the remainder should be paid back to lower the debt.
But now the president said he wants a tax on banks, apparently banks across the board, and he says that's to ensure that the government gets paid back. But as you just point out, they have been paid back in full by many banks. Others are on track to do it. So would you support, it's thought to be, this is going to be a popular tax because banks are not very popular across the country now. And so is it a ploy or is it justified to put a tax on banks?
I think it's a bad policy to put the tax on the banks because what's going to end up happening is you're going to tax the big banks, which are then going to pass that along down to the smaller community banks, which are then going to pass that along to the mortgage holders and the small businesses that are looking to try to get a loan. This is not going to be a tax on big banks. This is going to be a tax on Main Street America that's looking to go either pay a mortgage or get a loan.
There is apparently a difference in philosophy and how you folks would vote, you being between you and Seals, on that issue of taxes. Because
Sure.
my guess is you have said and would say on this show, say right now, that you would not like to see the Bush tax cuts that came in 2001 and 2003 expire as they're scheduled to do next year. Am I right on that?
That's absolutely right. This is going to be a tax increase come the end of the year. So it's not going to be, the expiration. And the expiration of the Bush tax cuts is a tax increase, and that's the last thing we need at this point in time in our economy.
And Seals says they were unfair, and so the implication is, my understanding is, he would like to see them expire. Is that your understanding as well?
I
You've been following this campaign a little bit.
I have been following this campaign a little bit. That would sound right, but I don't know for certain.
Well, we want to shore that up, and we'd like to have Dan Seals come on to make it clear. I mean, one thing I know he said just within a week or so of the election was, in the short run, he does not want to either raise taxes or cut spending. He thinks the spending is important now for the stimulus, so now is not the time to cut spending. He also says now is not the time to raise taxes. The implication would be, in the long run, it sounds like he wants to do both, raise taxes and cut spending. Is that fair? In the short run, what would you say? Would you say, should we cut spending in the short run or not? Federal spending?
Absolutely.
Does that have an effect, though, on a contracting effect to lessen the recovery?
Well, I think
I mean, are you a Keynesian? Are you sort of a Keynesian?
It depends.
Let me just interrupt my own question. And then, but you've got good training. I'm sure you've taken economics along the way at Denison University, okay? And you've followed this stuff. Would you view yourself as a Keynesian or a classical economist? What?
I consider myself to be a Main Street small business owner who knows that basically we have to operate our businesses. If we have less revenue coming in, we've got to tighten our belt and cut our spending. What we're looking at in Washington right now is the federal government looking at taking programs and expanding those programs by 12.5% on general spending. That's
12.5% a year, or
12.5% for this next year.
Yeah.
We're looking at those types of things that are absolutely the wrong approach. We need to have zero-based budgeting. We need to justify what we're talking about. We need to shrink the size of the federal government as opposed to expanding it. Now, I understand right now.
Is this the time to do it? Because now we've just started to turn it around. I think we've had two consecutive quarters of real GDP growth.
Yep.
Some would say that means we're just coming out of the recession. Is now the time, if we slam down on spending, does that have a de-stimulating effect, a contracting effect on the economy? Keynesians would say yes, right?
Yeah.
You're not a Keynesian?
Well, I think the thing is what we have to do is we have to figure out what spending we're talking about. If we look at OMB right now, they've got programs out there that they've already determined are ineffectual. Okay, so why are we continuing to fund it? To the tune of about $56 billion, 19 programs. It's only $56 billion, but you know what? $56 billion, that's a pretty sizable chunk of change.
So we're modifying the old Ev Dirksen saying, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Before you know it, we're talking real money.
Real money.
Now we're
saying
$56 billion here, $56 billion there. Before you know it, we're talking
about real
But seriously, because the government now, the budget now for the government spending is about $4 trillion, is that right?
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine. The GDP itself is about $19 billion. So the government's about a quarter of the economy, 20% of the economy. All right, so we're talking those kind of big bucks. You're saying we should cut where it's appropriate. You're also saying, though, don't raise taxes now, right?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, I think we need to have some tax breaks out there. So we need to be talking about giving some tax breaks out to businesses.
What kind? R&D?
No, I think,
research and development, is that something?
So research and development, I think, is critical when you're talking about some aspects of our economy.
You and Seals are in agreement. He's talking about tax credits for research and development. You're talking about tax credits for research
and
development.
What really the main thrust of the tax cuts really ought to be towards small business. 2/3 of all net new jobs in our country, conservatively, are created by small business. We need to get Main Street hiring again. Entrepreneurs, small businesses that are going to go out there and say, you know what, I am going to hire that additional worker. And we need to make sure that we're putting those things. I've asked for a moratorium on payroll taxes. I think that's critical, certainly from the employer side. We need to figure out how we infuse capital into the hands of job creators and do it now.
Does the Obama administration, are they going the other way? Because the Obama health care plan, if employers don't have health care or don't offer health care to the employees, they would then have an 8% special payroll tax, right? Essentially.
Yeah, well, it's not just a payroll tax.
But it's a tax on those companies.
This is
8% of what, I don't know what.
Gross receipts. This is
gross receipts.
This is a gross receipts tax. So the 8%
even-
of what
it's
you
even
do,
larger.
it's even larger than what we're talking about. So these
You
are
would
the
not
types-
agree with that?
Absolutely not.
But what would you say to people? Say people need health care. If the private sector doesn't do it, the government's going to do it. This is a way of the Obama administration incentivizing private firms to provide health care.
Well, I don't.
They're saying either provide it or we're going to tax you. You're saying that's a bad incentive?
I think it's a bad incentive, and I think what you're going to do is you're going to drive small businesses right out of business. Literally going door to door, talking to constituents in the 10th district. I specifically remember going to one lady who owns 6 restaurants, employs 60 people. If the health care plan goes through, she's going to shut her doors. That's 60 more people on the unemployment line.
So you're opposed to the Obama health care plan?
I am opposed to it. I think there are some things that need to be done. I think we need to be talking about competition across state lines, not only for insurance carriers, but for healthcare providers. We need to be talking about the ability for individuals to purchase their own plans and give the same tax breaks that businesses get. I think we need to be talking about tort reform, or certainly some sort of malpractice reform, which the state of Illinois is just throwing the doctors into a tailspin this last week with that.
Because they
ruling.
ruled the state legislation that capped non-economic losses, that's pain and suffering, that was unconstitutional.
That was unconstitutional.
And so what you want to see is this reform on the federal level that would override the state legislation essentially.
Certainly
would. It would put forward federal legislation that would not be affected by the state Supreme Court decision, right?
Exactly. There's no question that we need to be talking about how do we lower the costs? How do we get professionals? We see doctors that are leaving the state of Illinois, right? And I can tell you that the ROB, the one that delivered our 2 youngest children, picked up, left a thriving practice at Evanston Hospital, went down to Texas. She's making $100,000 more on day 1 before she delivers her first child or sees her first patient. Texas has some tort reform. She pays $10,000 in malpractice insurance down there. She was paying over $120,000 up here in Illinois. There is a problem. But I think the other thing...
What about, the pre-existing conditions?
Yeah.
Seal says whatever you do, you should make sure pre-existing conditions do not prevent people from getting health coverage.
Agreed.
You agree?
Absolutely.
Right there. Okay.
I think that's something that there are
He also
aspects of
says
the plan.
gender neutrality. He said women should not be charged more for premiums, charged more, discriminated against, which raise their insurance costs. For whatever reason, they seem to be charged higher prices. One, do you agree that they are charged, and would you also like to see gender equality in terms of women not being charged more simply because they are women?
The answer would be yes, I would.
You agree with him on that?
I think the difference is, and I think that's maybe younger women in their birthing years or whatever, I think they have higher health care costs simply because...
But you don't think they should be charged higher costs for that?
Well, I think
higher
that...
premiums for that?
I think that those are the ones part of the actuarial tables that they actually look at, and I think that that's a problem.
If it is, it's a yes or no. Should you follow the actuarial tables and charge them more, or should you follow what Seals is saying, no difference between men and women?
Well,
on that aspect.
On that aspect, I'd say there should be no difference.
Okay. Seals says public option. You think there should be a public option?
No,
You
I
disagree?
don't.
Okay.
I disagree on that. I think that we ought to be talking about some consumer-driven care, and we can talk about that later. But consumer-driven care, I think, is one of the things that we ought to be talking about in healthcare.
We'll come back later or the
Okay.
next show. You'll be
All
back?
right. All right.
Can you come back and join us again, right? We got that
we'll do
commitment?
it. All right, we'll make
right.
something happen.
Look, Iran.
Yeah.
There's a major difference, would you say, between you and what you know about Dan Seals on how to handle Iran?
I don't know. I haven't really talked to Dan about his stance on Iran. I can tell you certainly from my perspective, it's one of the greatest national security threats that I see right now today. Iran has thumbed their nose not only at the United Nations, but the United States. They are moving headlong into acquiring a nuclear weapon.
So if Israel goes ahead and takes out Iran, takes out the nuclear capability in Iran,
Yep.
would you support Israel on that after the fact?
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. Would you give a signal if they want to do it, it's okay?
I think we ought to be standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel. There's no question that those in charge in Iran, a madman actually that's running that country right now, has made it clear that his main objective, or one of his objectives, is to drive Israel into the sea, to wipe them off the face of the map, and that's something that we cannot, under any circumstances, allow to happen.
Let's go over to some of the social issues.
Okay.
This district is, the 10th has been held for a long time, previously by John Porter for 21 years, then Mark Kirk. Both of those
Good guess.
gentlemen said
Yep.
they were fiscal conservatives, social moderates. Would you use that to describe yourself?
I would.
A social moderate.
Yeah.
So you've said before to me you're somewhat in between in terms of being pro-choice and pro-life. Does that still fit?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I'm not 100% one way.
Right.
And
In that
so-
sense, you're in between.
In that sense, I'm in between. To a certain extent, if you go to those that are heavily on one side, they say I'm not far enough to their side, and on the other, they'd say the same.
You favor
So-
parental notice, maybe more of a state issue than a federal issue, but
Right.
you favor that, right?
Absolutely.
And you think it should be the parents or legal guardians who should be given notice of a minor daughter's abortion, not a cousin or an uncle or a abortion provider. You
Yeah,
agree?
I would agree with that.
I think that's a difference between you and Dan Seals. We have to see. He may favor parental notice in the latter sense, maybe in no sense. We don't know.
I mean, there's obviously nuances to all of this, and certainly when you're talking about a judge coming in and talking about this in an area where there may be danger at home or something along those lines, you bet.
But in general,
yeah.
you believe in a woman's right to choose.
Yes,
And so in general, you wouldn't like to see Roe v. Wade overturned, at least not completely. Is
that's
that right?
correct.
And you would support a ban on partial birth abortion. We've talked about this before, not in this show. But if, as past Congress, that banned partial birth abortion did not have an exception for the health of the mother.
I think it
you'd
would be ruled unconstitutional, and
But it
therefore I would
wasn't
not.
ruled. But it wasn't. It was not taken by the court. It was essentially affirmed.
Well, I think that
But
certainly
your
the
view is
doctor-
there should be an exception for the health of the mother.
Yeah,
And so that might be a tough vote for you.
yeah. But I think that should be an exception out there for the health of the mother.
On guns, you generally a believer in gun control?
I believe in the Second Amendment. I think that's the Heller decision in Washington, D.C., I think was certainly something that the Supreme
Person
Court...
has a right to self-defense, and you
Absolutely.
would think own have a handgun in their home to protect
Absolutely,
themselves.
yes.
But you're not going to cut out all gun control. You think
Look,
it's
I
right
think-
for the state
listen,
and
I-
perhaps the federal government to regulate some of that.
I think it's critical that there's education. I myself, as a scoutmaster, I can tell you that we go through hunter safety. There's no question that that's a critical aspect, and I'm certainly for. I think we need to have responsible gun ownership with reasonable
And
restrictions.
responsible gun control?
Responsible, sure.
Gun ownership and gun control, responsible.
Yeah, I think it needs to be responsible. And
We're
that
going
should
to
be.
continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Robert Dold, who's running for Congress in the 10th Congressional District. He is the Republican nominee. He's running against the Democrat. That is Dan Seals, who is the Democrat nominee in the 10th Congressional District. That district, Bob, where does it go? It starts over in Kenilworth?
No, it starts down in Wilmette, part of Wilmette, and
Excuse me, yeah.
part of Wilmette, and it
Goes through Kenilworth.
goes all the way up to, includes Waukegan, goes from the lake out past Arlington Heights, and includes portions of Palatine and Inverness. So it's fairly large district.
As we said, we'd like Dan Seals to be here. Dan, Pat Moggy, your campaign guy, somebody get in touch with me. I'd like to see you here separately. Then hopefully we'll have both Dan Seals and Robert Dold on together. You'd be up for that?
Sure,
You're not going to hide from that. Seals wants to debate. You say, yeah, right here on Public Affairs?
right here on Public Affairs.
Commitment made. Okay.
Appreciate it.
There you go. We're going to keep talking, as we say, as the credits roll. Free trade. You're a free trader?
Yeah, I am.
All right. You think
think it's
Seals a little
important.
different? Would he have supported CAFTA, NAFTA? You don't know. You would
don't
have
know.
supported NAFTA. You would have supported CAFTA.
I am a free trader. There's no question.
But you
about
would
it.
have
I think
supported
it's
those things, CAFTA and NAFTA.
certainly NAFTA I would have supported, and I think it's critical that we talk about free trade.
Card check.
I'm against card check 100%.
Seals would like card check, probably.
It's
We
a
don't
bad
know.
call as far as I'm concerned. It's un-American and it's against the small guy.
Takes away the secret ballot for
Absolutely.
you. So
It's
people who
completely
want to
un-American.
join a union, they should have a right to express that secretly.
Absolutely.
Ballot.
Listen, it's not that we're against the unions. We're against them taking the secret ballot away. It's un-American and it's against the small guy.
Minimum wages, in general, you're in favor of minimum wages or no?
Minimum wages, I think minimum wages, yeah, we need to have a
Do
minimum wage.
they cause unemployment?
Well, I can tell, certainly in my business, I can tell you that we wouldn't be able to attract and retain the people we're looking for. We have to pay a premium.
Same-sex marriage, you would say no?
Same-sex marriage, I would say no.
Seals would say yes.
I believe marriage is between a man and woman. I think that same-sex partners need to have some rights, but certainly not the same.